Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. Usually we start with a story, but the story is the panel discussion today. We are talking about centrally assessed taxes. We're going to go through what they are, how they're applied, and some of the problems that we have with them. Joining us for this conversation, Commissioner Phil Lyman from San Juan County. Phil, thanks for making the drive in.
Thank you, Chad.
I hope it was scenic and pretty today.
Always.
Commissioner Bruce Johnson, who's the chair of the Utah State Tax Commission. Commissioner, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And Kelly Wright, who is the Deputy District Attorney of Salt Lake County, who specializes in the topic of tax and revenue. Let me ask a real simple question. I have a small business. It's established, it produces this show. We're established in Salt Lake County. I don't ever see you guys because I'm not centrally assessed. What qualifies a company to be on the centrally assessed roll?
One example of the unit concept, which I think is real good, this came from Dr. James Bondbright in 1932. He says if you take a pair of gloves and sell them, and say, let's say you sell one glove of the two, it's going to be worth far less than you sell the set. So the two gloves, which are separate properties, together combined produce a higher value. So there's a synergy that goes on there. And there are specific properties that include utilities, include mines, mining property, and that type of thing. So we looked at the Constitution. We also have by statute a provision that says to the extent property crosses county lines, we call it unitary property, that we have a central assessment for good reasons, right? Because getting two assessors together to value property, railroad's a good example, but there are a number of properties that cross lines and operate as a unit.
We have some very large corporations, for example, Walmart. You can argue that that operates across state lines because it's got warehouses, distribution facilities, trucking. Nevertheless, that's a locally assessed property because it's not deemed to have the same kind of unitary operation that you would see in a power distribution company or a pipeline or an airline.
Which is to say that it is the property that crosses the lines, right? Operating property.
Centrally assessed taxes and tax rates in general are probably the most difficult thing for people to grasp. They look at property tax and they go, how come my, the tax rate went up and my property value went down and all this stuff? How does that work, Kelly?
Okay, I appreciate that because that's fundamental to, I think, this whole discussion. In Utah, we have a truth in taxation statute and we have a certified tax rate. So the way we're set up is that revenues remain constant. I might refer to it as a flat revenue variable rate system. So the rate is a function of the budget divided by the property tax base, and that gives you the rate. So our system says that the rate, we call it a certified tax rate, cannot raise more revenues than you had the year before, with some nuances to that, new growth and so on. But so if all things being equal with the revenues, we're not changing revenues, the tax base shifts and changes. And as it changes, as it drops, then you'll see a certified tax rate that goes up. As the tax base increases and grows, you'll see the rate go down.
Okay, so it's the revenue is the flat line and the other elements, basically the budget gets sent in and everything else adjusts to make sure that that hits. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
And the one thing that I'd point out on that is that what happens to an individual taxpayer depends on how much their value goes up or goes down. Because if the taxpayer's value goes up more than the rest of the property in the county on average, they're going to see a tax increase on their individual property. Right. Whereas if their property decreases in value more than the average, they'll see a property tax decrease regardless of what may happen to other properties.
But
in
it
the
still
county.
Is operating under that same
overall,
principle.
And that's accurate. That's how it works. And I think the issue that we're going to talk about today is that tax base and the relative proportion of locally assessed, and I'll refer a lot to the residential property versus the state assessed property, and the relative percentages within that tax base.
Kelly mentioned the nuances, besides some nuances that takes place. And one of those nuances is that when centrally assessed property goes up, that's considered new growth. So that's new revenue to the counties. When centrally assessed property goes down, that doesn't reverse that trend, it shifts that tax burden to the residences. So as centrally assessed property goes up and down, what it does, and the tax commission calls it the ratchet effect, it ratchets individual property taxes higher and higher. And in some counties, you know, if you got 5% centrally assessed, that may not be a huge deal, but in a county like San Juan County where you've got 65% centrally assessed, a swing upwards can mean a huge windfall of money for the taxing entities, whereas a decrease in that shifts all that burden right over to the homeowners. Under the certified system with no truth in taxation, the homeowners say, why did my taxes go up by 20%? Well, it's still under the certified rate, no truth in taxation.
And that's a very good point, because the question is, how has that changed for the statewide over the last 15 years or so?
People see these rates come up and they think, okay, we're getting breaks, we're giving all these breaks to the corporations and industries because you know, their taxable value goes down. But isn't that, Commissioner, really a function of depreciation?
Well, it may be a function of depreciation. It may be a function of you know, the market. If it's a coal mining property or an oil and gas property and the gas prices drop, the property is going to become less valuable. So what we're trying to do at the Tax Commission on our centrally assessed properties is to establish fair market value. That's a difficult concept. When you're talking about one house that's kind of maybe a cookie cutter house in a subdivision, you know, you have a sense whether it's $250,000 or $350,000 or $150,000. When you've got you know, I think we can use names, when you've got Pacific Core, when you've got Kennecott, when you've got some of these really unique properties that don't get bought and sold very often, and they're completely unique, it's a difficult process to try to figure out what the fair market value is. The county keeps us honest. They often come in and say, you're valuing these properties too low. The taxpayers will often come in and say, you're valuing us too high. And ultimately, on many of those cases, we have a hearing before the four commissioners, and we hear experts on both sides and try to figure out what the right value is. But it's, you know, we have very accomplished experts on both sides that have radically different ideas of what the value is.
Well, Phil, in your opinion, does a lot of this come from the ratcheting, the fact that new growth sets the bar higher, and then when that commercial property or that centrally assessed property starts to devalue on market conditions or something else, the obligation still sits there? Is that correct?
Right, and I think the shift of the tax burden to the residences is what gets people's attention when you see a large shift in that tax burden. Sometimes we look at the companies and say, hey, they went in and argued, they hired their attorneys, and they dodged their tax liability. But often the case is the market's declined, you know, copper prices drop, or coal prices go down, or uranium goes down, and you see these companies truly suffer a financial loss. And I agree with the commissioner that, you know, valuing a company like this, you know, one of these centrally assessed as a unit that operates across several states or several counties, that's a complex process, and it can be a tough job.
One of the big issues is the issue of intangibles and the vague definition that has been placed in the code and has been interpreted. That has been exploited, if you will, my characterization, by these large companies who have a lot of resources. And so as you expand the intangible property definition, it's not taxable. So that drops the value.
Can we hold the list for a second? Because we
Sure.
do have to take a commercial break. We'll come up and resurface with that, and we'll continue on from the other 4 points. We'll be right back on the county seat in just a second.
Industry is the symbol of Utah. Beauty is what makes it unique. Nowhere else are these two qualities exemplified like in Uinta County. Oil and gas extraction, pioneer history, the spirit of hard work and integrity that feed our state. Built in the middle of the most spectacular backdrop in the West. Isn't it time you found the balance you've been looking for? Uinta County, Utah, where industry meets inspiration.
Let's be honest, you don't know much about Beaver County. Well, let me tell you about it. It's the birthplace of outlaw Butch Cassidy and inventor Philo T. Farnsworth. Some of the best skiing in Utah is at Eagle Point. You've got camping, Canyon Breeze Golf Course, Crusher and the Tushers Beaver Territorial Courthouse, snowmobiling, renewable energy, Pioneer Car Show, Squeaky Cheese, Ghost Towns to explore, best water in the country, Paiute ATV trails, Old Frisco kilns, horse racing, hunting, fishing, and it's a good place to live. Beaver County, mountains of fun. I could tell you more, but why don't you come and see it for yourself?
Time for us to take off and go to our
next week's
adventure.
Awesome.
All right, welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today has been centrally assessed taxes. And before I so rudely interrupted Kelly with a disgusting free enterprise commercial break, you were on 5 points as to why centrally assessed percentage of property tax is dropping. Recap number one real quickly, and let's go on to the others.
Thank you. I think it is the issue of intangibles. The Constitution refers to intangible property as being exempt, and property is a very specific item. But cases and decisions have interpreted intangible property to be intangibles or intangible assets, which creates a very fuzzy line, and so that is often exploited by taxpayers. So that's one. The second is that because we don't have the same kind of market data that we have for houses, for residential properties, that we're able to look at a sale, we go to the three approaches to value: the income, the cost, and the market. And there's very little data on that, on the market. And so you use the income approach and the cost approach. I have seen personally, very novel approaches to valuing these properties. And so that has created an issue, I think, that has a tendency to drive, or potential to drive values down. The third is sometimes we're concerned about the presumption of correctness because the Property Tax Division is the entity with the Tax Commission that is required by law to assess these properties. Then you have to rely on their resources. They do a mass appraisal. The law has evolved to give them a presumption of correctness. And oftentimes when these appeals go, we lose that presumption of correctness. We focus on specific issues, and then those issues carry the day ultimately for further policies down the road. So that's a concern. There are some technological changes. You know, we've gone from the analog to the digital, from the copper wire to the fiber optic to the wireless. So we have some of those. But I think one of the important issues and concerns that we have is what we perceive to be a atmosphere that fosters appeals. So for instance, if you were to ask me how often did the Property Tax Division prevail in the assessments they did over the last 15 years, I'd have to say rarely. They rarely prevail, which means that the values are often dropped, and we like to refer to it as splitting the baby. So why wouldn't a taxpayer want to file if they know and realize that there's going to be a drop in value? And part of that is you know, candidly, a lack of resources. You could ask what resources are available with the division to fight litigation. And
yes.
Yeah, I'd love to address the splitting the baby issue, because I agree, I think, with Kelly that is the perceived effect. But what happens is we have 4 tax commissioners. We're all appointed by the governor. We're all approved by the Senate. We have a constitutional duty to do our best to establish a value. We have experts on one side that say this. We have experts on the other side that say this. It is rare for us to look at one expert and say, you got absolutely everything right. We agree with everything you did. We disagree with everything this expert did. we usually find things we like in both appraisals. The effect of that is that it's going to drive the value somewhat toward the middle, but we try very hard not to be result oriented. We try to decide those on an issue by issue basis. But when you have a week-long hearing with a lot of experts, you're going to have better information than the property tax division had when they made that original assessment.
And Kelly's point of view was presented like a true litigator. It was a very impressive litigation. Great topic. Stay with us. I think you'll enjoy it. If you've stayed with us so far, you're tuned into this tax issue. We'll be right back.
Get ready, set, jump. The day starts off at sunrise with the Cisco Disco. Come catch Cisco fish at Cisco Beach on the east side of Bear Lake. After the fishing, why not jump in the lake yourself? The Bear Lake Monster Polar Plunge starts at 11 a.m. at the Bear Lake State Park Arena. All proceeds from the event go to Primary Children's Medical Center. On January 26th, gather your family and head north for a great cause. Visit bearlake.org for more information. Rich County, take the plunge.
Unlimited opportunity for adventure. It's all about knowing where to look. ATV adventures, rock crawling events, art festivals, and wildlife events. The opportunities are limitless. Pick your adventure in Miller County.
Check out these pictures from my vacation.
Where did you go again?
Garfield County, you know, like Bryce Canyon, Devil's Rock Garden.
Where's that?
Capitol Reef, Kodachrome Basin, Highway 12.
Wait a minute, I wanted to see more.
A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but there's nothing like experiencing the real thing firsthand. Gather your family and see the world's largest concentration of scenic attractions. Garfield County, Utah. Find the ultimate adventure.
Rediscover your sense of adventure by attending the annual Bluff International Balloon Festival. Join us for some of the most beautiful, unencumbered red rock flying in the Southwest, January 18th through the 20th in Bluff, Utah. Watch as colorful balloons kiss the red rock bluffs. Utah's San Juan County, where life is elevated.
Welcome back to the county seat. Centrally assessed taxes have been our topic today. This has been, I would describe a really robust discussion on it, and I think we've made some great headway on it. Who wants to take it?
I'll jump in on this. We were talking a little bit about the discrepancy between, you know, that shift in tax burden to the residences. One thing I think is important, residences get a 45% tax exemption right off the bat, so they don't pay on 100% of their assets like you would in your business.
True. Or
like these other companies do. When we come to the intangibles, those are difficult to do. You know, probably the landmark case was the Wiltel case back
1995.
1995. Worked its way through
97.
where the division said they had assets of 37 million. Wiltel said we've got assets of 15 million. They ended up settling it at 30 million. Now, if that's a loss to the division, I'm not seeing that. It looks like a victory to the division. And also, what was changed in that was that they went to the legislature and got other intangibles removed from that, so that they could move forward and try to tax those intangibles as well. The point that I would like to get in this program, before we get too far, before we run out of time, is these businesses are people too. You know, Mitt Romney gets in trouble for saying that, but when you talk about, whether you're talking about corporations or government, we're talking about people. And those issues are complex. If a corporation is forced to pay more taxes, they do raise their rates. They have to raise their prices, or they take the hostess avenue and declare bankruptcy. In San Juan County in 2007, a few weeks before Christmas, Lisbon Valley came out and announced, we're closing our mines, we're laying off 101 families. The response from the government side was, well, what about our $750,000 of property taxes that is due to us? Government wasn't saying, what are we going to do for these 101 families that have just lost their jobs and are going to be displaced? And to me, there's a paradigm there. One saying, look after the government. The other is saying, look after the corporations. Thankfully, we've got a tax commission in the middle that says, we'll look at both.
I think it's important to know, from the tax commission's point of view, what we try to determine is fair market value. The tax rates are set by other people. Residential exemptions are allowed by the Constitution but set by the legislature. We're not in the business of determining what somebody's tax burden should be. The Tax Commission is in the business of hopefully properly administering the laws, and in the case of property valuation, determining fair market value. And you know, that has dramatic effects on people, but that is what we view as our role.
But one of the issues, and I think on this shifting factor, I have to say that because we're in a flat revenue, variable rate system, the only fair way to do it is to make sure that everybody is assessed uniformly and equally, right? So the fair market value standard is the standard that should apply, and we have no, that's exactly how it should be. Everybody should pay their fair share. The concern is when we see a perception that that's not being done.
We'll be right back on the county seat in just a second.
Have you ever wanted to go on a vacation to Mars? What about a visit to the Old West? Impossible, right? Well, forget what you think is real. In southern Utah's Kane County, other worlds are just an ATV ride away. The Old West lives on in every sunset. From the downtown streets of Little Hollywood to the vistas that have inspired the world. Never find yourself closer to home and yet farther than you've ever been. Southern Utah's Kane County, where anywhere is possible.
The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration. SITLA manages 3.5 million acres of Utah lands with the express purpose of furthering the education of Utah students while promoting local industry, oil and gas, even residential development, all at the same time. Through the careful use of trust lands, we distributed more than $22 million to Utah schools last year. The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, building the state's permanent school fund.
So, what brings you to town?
What brings anyone to St. George? A couple rounds of golf, a little relaxation.
What, is that all?
Is there more? In a retirement community? Should have stuck with the back nine.
We're going to continue our conversation on centrally assessed taxes. Kelly, very quickly wrap it up, and then let's point our attention to some solutions.
And I want to compare property, plant, and equipment on their books from 1994 to, say, 2010. So Company P is probably one of the largest utilities in the state. Back in 1994, their PP&E was $8.2 billion. In 2010, it's $13.8 billion, which is a 68% increase. Company S had in 1994 $110 million in PP&E. 2010, $2.9 billion, a 2,575% increase. But my point is, we see evidence of plant, property, and equipment increasing, but we see the shift and the percentage of centrally assessed shrinking, and that's the concern.
You know, I think the numbers bear looking at, but I will also say, and I don't view it as my role to defend the centrally assessed taxpayers. I'm trying to be impartial in this, but I will say, you know, we have hotels in downtown Salt Lake that didn't exist 10 years ago, so they haven't just gone up by some percentage. They've gone up from zero to whatever they are. So that's the problem. You need to, one of the things you need to look at, I agree with Kelly's point about intangibles, that changed the playing field. I think you need to ask yourself, are these centrally assessed taxpayers a larger part of the economy now than they were a few years ago, or are they a smaller part of the economy? That's probably a better benchmark than the assets of the particular companies. But, you know, studies could be done on that. It would be interesting to see the results.
All right, where do we go, Phil?
Chad, I'm not sure what the solution is, but the bottom line, I guess maybe not the bottom line, but a key point here, corporations have to provide a valuable product. They compete for market share. Government doesn't do that. Government has to be regulated by the people. These corporations are also regulated by the people in the way they spend their money. That's why you see some, you know, do very well and some go out of business. But I think that's a key point, and government needs to recognize that these are the people that put food on the table for the families, that hire the families. You raise the rates on these companies, they do pass it through in order to stay in business. If they're good managers, they stay in business. If they're good managers, their cash goes up. If they're not as good as managers, or if the market just goes against them, then these businesses go out of business. And that's where the sensitivity needs to come. And when we talk about this centrally assessed, I come back to this paradigm. The corporations don't feel like they're being undertaxed. On the government side, they feel like they're being cheated out of revenue that they should be able to get. So we come back to trying to assess a fair market value, which is what this system does, which is why they can take it to court, which is why they can fight it. That's the way the system works. They shouldn't be vilified for doing that. That's the way the system works, and that's how they come to their fair market value.
And I jump in with that. I agree. It ought to be a parity, and that's important. In this issue, and I think it's great for where we're at, it is a flat revenue. And I think that's important because the government doesn't get the increase in revenues. The certified tax rate is based upon that, putting aside growth, which is growth requires more services.
If you look at their financial statements, they've had plenty of growth on the government side.
Well, but if you look at that, then the growth comes because we have to provide more services. But the way it's set up is that we look at last year's revenues, and we can't exceed that unless we go through the truth in taxation.
Or there's new growth.
I have three suggestions for a resolution.
Okay.
I think there should be a statutory look at clarifying and redefining under the Constitution what intangible property is. And I think that's a big issue, and the Commissioner's already indicated. Number two, I think the division, who is the entity under the auspices of the Tax Commission charged with doing these assessments, should have the resources they need to do it right and then to be able to defend what they do. And then the third assessment would be to step back and take a look at making sure there's parity and making sure that the fair market value is being assessed correctly, and look at the case law as it's evolved and make sure that the parties meet the burdens that they have, and otherwise rely on the presumption.
Okay, Commissioner, you get the last word here.
Well, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to look at the precedent, the case law, and the expert opinions. There isn't an agency in the state or in a county or in the city, and there probably isn't a private corporation that didn't wish they had more resources to do their work. Could we do a more thorough, efficient job if we had a lot more personnel? Yes, it would be a cost on the taxpayers to do that. I think we do a good job. I recognize the perception that are out there. The perceptions concern me because I want people to believe the system is fair. I believe it's fair, but I'm always open to ideas to improve it.
Thank you for joining us on the air for the county seat. We appreciate your involvement in it. Remember, the local government is the government that affects your life most, and we'll see you next week.